mine is too big, too large.
File's too big.
So if I share my screen,
Try that.
Okay, let me see if you can. Let's see here. Like, can you?
I don't see them yet. It takes a little bit.
Okay.
A little while.
Can you see that?
No, I don't see anything.
Okay.
I know in the past, if we saved as a PDF and then share slides.
Oh yeah, I'll do that real quick.
That might work.
Yep, I'll do that real quick. Okay. So how do I show the slides? Like that? I can't hear you if you're.
You can see it on your.
Yep, I can see the slides on mine.
Yeah, we can see it as well.
Okay, great.
Perfect.
Awesome. I'm ready.
Just make sure that
we got sound. Okay. Shall I just go with an intro and then we can go? Okay, and then maybe we'll get feedback from our audience. So I'll go ahead and get started with an introduction. It looks like we're going live right now. So maybe we'll get feedback on if the sound quality is good. We usually get a information or individuals kind of commenting that either there's an echo or whatever. But okay, so my name is LaDawn Yazzie. I'm the Tribal Public Health Educator in San Ildefonso, and I'm happy to be here. I'm very excited to introduce to you Linda Black Elk.
We have her as a special guest. Hold on. I can hear an echo. Yep. I think we're good then if I can hear the echo. So, when I ni shle, twatso ni bashish chin, twedich eat ni dashiche, ishi hintashionale. I just want to introduce myself to all my relatives that are out there. I'm Navajo. I'm coming in from Arizona, a small community called Delcon, in a partnership with the CDC and Albuquerque Area Southwest Tribal Epidemiology Center. I have been assigned to a pueblo in New Mexico called San Ildefonso. I'm very happy to be here to be able to bring in all of, as much as I can to educate the community about health, wellness, and some of the teachings that I've learned over the years. I have a master's in public health. And so some of the conversations that we have talked about in bringing this podcast together was to enlighten community members about health initiatives that are taking place all over the United States, not just in small communities, but across the state and then across the nation. So everyone's has different ideas of how foods can be brought back or to talk. They have been able to talk and educate us about some of the foods that are beneficial from our cultural and our traditional backgrounds. And so we have Linda here, who's going to explain a little bit more. She's an ethnobotanist and also a food sovereignty coordinator.
Hi, everyone. I'm so honored to be here with you all
Linda,
today.
we can't hear you.
Okay, I'm unmuted.
I don't know.
No one can hear
I'm
me?
not sure. Usually the audience can hear when we can't hear.
Can the audience hear me?
Hold on. Let's see if we can log into our Facebook page and see if it's working on that end.
Okay. Hello. Testing. I don't know if anyone can hear me. Oh, you can hear me? Awesome. Thanks, Raylene.
Okay. I think we're good to go.
All right. Great. Well, hi, everybody. I'm Linda Black Elk. And as LaDawn said, I'm the food sovereignty coordinator at United Tribes Technical College. And I know you all have some tribal colleges down south. I'm at a tribal college in Bismarck, North Dakota. United Tribes is intertribal. So we actually have students from all tribes.
Her? I'm not sure.
I can hear you, LaDawn. Okay. So I just wanted to talk a little bit today about what I do at United Tribes. And I wanted to talk about how really we try to keep things as simple as possible, because I have a lot of students who come in who don't have any experience with traditional foods. And really, a lot of them don't have any experience with healthy foods and medicinal foods, right? Because we're big believers. I'm sure you all have heard the phrase, food is medicine, right? People are kind of overusing that phrase these days, but we take it very literally here. We try to eat things that are actually going to reduce inflammation, things that are going to lower our blood sugar. We try to eat foods that are anti-cancer, right? So we try to incorporate food into our medicine into our lives every day. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So I just wanted to show you some of the things that we do. So here at United Tribes, and even in my everyday life, we grow medicine, food and medicine. I've had a garden every year of my life, my entire life, even when I lived in a little apartment. So if you see that slide, that picture there on the right, when I first moved into the town that I now live in, we had to move into a very tiny apartment, but we're lucky because it had a balcony. And I was able to grow hundreds of pounds of produce just on that balcony that was about 4 by 8. And so it was really amazing. And I'm very lucky to have the skills to do that. But I have to tell you guys, we were growing food even look down here. I don't know if you guys can see my pointer, but if you look in the center, actually to the right and down on the deck, there's a silver tray. That is a turkey roasting dish, a foil pan that I got at Walmart. And I happen to have an extra one left over from cooking a turkey. And so I planted herbs in there. So that's cilantro that you see growing in there. So I'm a big believer that we need to keep things simple and just grow food wherever you can. I work with a lot of people who live in urban areas who don't have any space for a garden. And what I tell them is that even if you just have one container, look at this 5-gallon bucket here. I'm growing turmeric in that bucket in North Dakota. And so if I can grow turmeric, which is a tropical plant in North Dakota in a 5-gallon bucket, you all can grow turmeric too, especially where you're at in your warm climate. But we need to keep things simple. So even if you're just growing one tomato plant or one, bean plant, you're part of the food system, right? Because those things are really healthy, delicious, and important. But where I live and where I work here at United Tribes, if you see that photo on the left, we grow food and we hand it out to the public. And so we feel like that's our job, even as a tribal college and university, is to make sure that our community has access to healthy traditional foods. So we grow all this food. See all this stuff? We even grow flowers. We grow all tons of food. But then the question is, then what? Because I have lots of students who can grow food like crazy. They can plant a garden. They know how to put a plant in the ground. But then what do they do with it? I had a student last year who told me that they grew butternut squash and they ended up with 25 squash. Okay. What's one student going to do with 25 squash? She had no idea. She didn't even know how to cook squash. So the first thing that I ask my students to do, even before we start growing, is I ask them to change their relationship with food. Okay. Now, what does that mean? In this world that we live in, this sort of westernized, colonized world, we believe that everything we eat has to be either sweet or salty, right? We have forgotten that food used to have all different kinds of flavors: spicy, bitter, sour, right? Instead, everything we eat or even drink has to be sweet or salty. And a lot of times I'll have students say, well, my coffee is bitter. I drink coffee. And I'm like, well, what do you put in your coffee? And they usually put sugar and cream in their coffee to try to make it a little sweeter and less bitter. So I ask my students to think of, foods that are different, things that they've never tried. And one of the first things I ask my students to do every semester is to eat dandelion leaves. Okay. Now, I don't know how many of you all have eaten dandelion leaves, but the entire dandelion is edible, the whole thing. And way back in the day, before we started to think of dandelions as a weed, dandelions were food. Okay. And medicine. Dandelions are amazing medicine. They help to lower blood sugar. All parts of the dandelion help to lower blood sugar. Dandelions help to heal your pancreas. So if you are diabetic, or even if you're pre-diabetic, if you start to consume a little bit of dandelion every day, it will help to heal your pancreas and promote healthy release of insulin from your pancreas. Okay, so it helps to regulate insulin. So once your pancreas is damaged, by sugar, high sugar levels, blood sugar levels, it's very hard to repair it. But dandelion is one of those foods and medicines that really help with that. The other great thing about dandelion is that it's super safe. You kind of can't eat too many dandelion leaves. You can put them in salad. You can chop them up and put them in your scrambled eggs in the morning with a little bit of bacon. You can do all kinds of things with dandelions. My mom is Korean and Mongolian. She's from the northern part of Mongolia, and she eats a lot of bitter greens. She grew up eating a lot of bitter greens. And this is our favorite. This is a recipe she taught me that's very delicious. And if you've never eaten dandelion greens before, or you're afraid to, this is the easiest, most absolutely delicious way to eat dandelions. And I wanted to make sure to include that recipe for all of you. I also put a few indigenous names up there. I'm sorry that I don't have the Dene or the Tewa or Tiwa names up there. But maybe one of you guys could put the name that dandelion by in the comments. That would be great. But Wakjazi in Lakota, Dudu Shabujibik in Ojibwe, and Pitsamu in Blackfoot. So these are all indigenous languages. And like I said, this is the first thing I have my students do is to eat some dandelion leaves. Okay. Now this is actually a video that doesn't work right now, but in this video, my students got together inside of our Earth Lodge. That's kind of like a hogan. For those of you who might have grown up with a hogan, an earth lodge is a hogan-like structure that indigenous people live in up here. And my students, we have one on campus, and my students decided to go in there and all eat their dandelion leaves together for support. And they loved them. Some of them dip them in ranch dressing. Some of them eat them with bacon. I don't care how they're eating it, as long as they start to think of dandelions and these bitter weeds, quote unquote, as food. I want them to change their relationship with dandelions, okay? So once they start to change their relationship with food, we start to talk about food preservation. Because remember, I was telling you about my student who had like 25 squash. Well, I wanted her to think about not just how to eat squash today, but how to have squash in the super cold winter months. Now, I know some of you may not know what it's like if you've never been up here in the winter, but we get temperatures of minus 65 Fahrenheit every winter. We, currently we have about 3 feet of snow on the ground. Sometimes we'll get upwards of like 7 feet of snow on the ground, right? So we have to think about food preservation. How do we make sure we still have squash to eat in January? Okay. And so I teach my students, I teach my family, my community, all kinds of food preservation and medicine preservation. How do we make sure that you all have access to your beautiful medicines in the wintertime? This is super important because I've noticed with a lot of my students, especially my students from down south in Arizona and New Mexico, they will do really good during the winter months. And then when it gets to, during the summer months when it's warm and they have access to a lot of stuff, but then when it gets cold, they go back to eating processed foods. They go back to eating stuff from cans and boxes because it's easy and they don't want to have to cook a whole bunch. So I teach my students up here, this is more of a contemporary food preservation technique, but I teach my students how to can. I teach them water bath canning. I teach them how to can pressure canning. We also, does anyone know what this is in the middle? This is sauerkraut, homemade sauerkraut from cabbages and kale that we grew right here on campus. And I teach my students how to ferment all kinds of fruits and vegetables because fermented vegetables are so important for our health. Through generations of eating processed foods and eating things like white flour in fry bread, I'm sorry to say, don't attack me, but from eating things like fry bread, things that are high in simple carbohydrates, things that are high in white sugar, from generations of doing that, we have destroyed our gut microbiome. That's the cool little critters that live in our gut and help us digest our food and help us get nutrients from our food. If we don't have a healthy gut microbiome, we could eat all the broccoli we want. We're not getting all the nutrition from it that we need. So in order to heal our gut microbiome, we need things like fermented foods, like sauerkraut, like kimchi, things like that. And so I teach my students how to do that, and they love it. They love having access to that. And then I teach them, these are pickled purslane. I know purslane grows down there. That's a plant that grows a lot of times in people's gardens and flower beds, and people try to harvest it and then throw it away. But it's a delicious edible wild plant, and we pickle that. In this picture, my students are actually making chokecherry patties. So that's crushed chokecherries that we puree and then form into patties, and we dry them. Traditionally, we'll dry them in the sun, but in this case, we are drying them in a dehydrator. And if you don't have a dehydrator and you want to eat healthier and learn how to preserve your traditional foods, I got to tell you, having a dehydrator is so easy and so convenient. This one cost $40 at Walmart. It's made by Presto, and it's so easy to have. And look here in this bowl. That's a bowl of garden-grown tomatoes. We are processing these chokecherries to dry, but then we cut up all of our extra tomatoes so that they wouldn't go bad, and we dried those as well. we really run out of freezer space quickly up here. I don't know about you guys, but then we also have to worry about what if the electricity goes out? We don't want all of our frozen food to spoil. And I know you guys have to worry about that a lot of times down there. So dried food is really the way to go, and it retains so many of the important nutrients. So first we change our relationship with food. Then I teach them how to preserve food so that we have it all the time. And then, here's more food preservation. We harvest apples and we make applesauce. If you've never had dried watermelon, can I just urge you guys to please try drying watermelon this year? Just slice it to a 1/4 inch thick, put it in the dehydrator, and you basically have the equivalent of what tastes like watermelon taffy. It takes a long time to dry, but dried watermelon is delicious. And I know we would all prefer fresh watermelon, but up here, especially where it's cold, I don't know about down there, but up here where it's cold, watermelon is spoiled by the time mid-December rolls around. So learning to dry it has been important. But I also do teach my students how to make jelly and jams. I try to use alternative sugars, not white sugar, but I want them to at least have that skill. We take our apples and make applesauce, apple rings, dried apple rings, all kinds of stuff. These are dried squash. Do you guys dry squash down there? We dry our squash. These are zucchini squash. Look at this picture on the lower right.
Okay.
That is one huge zucchini. And when it is dried, it only takes up this much space. So it went from this to this. And so we can, this is a drying rack, and you can see all the yellow crookneck squash and the zucchini hanging on there. We just air dry it, and then we have it all winter long to put into our soups and stews. As you guys probably know, zucchini gets kind of yucky after a while, the texture, but dried zucchini always has an amazing texture. And then I even teach my students how to make ketchup from wild plants. So that's what's here. So instead of buying ketchup, we make ketchup out of garden tomatoes and wild plants. And I do also teach them even things how to make butter. Now, a lot of my students, being Indigenous, they are lactose intolerant, but a lot of my students love butter. So even though I know that milk and cream are not necessarily traditional, they're not traditional. It's important for my students to at least have this skill to be able to make butter. So we do that in class as well. We also dry all of our greens. We have jars and jars of greens. And that way, when we make our soups in the winter, we just throw them in there. And then I know something else that some of my friends down south do in northern New Mexico, some of my Indigenous friends, we dry meat. I don't know if you guys cut and dry meat down there, but it is so awesome to have dried meat around. It doesn't take up freezer space. When it's cooked, it's delicious. We could make it into jerky if we want, but I love dried meat in soups and stews. And so I teach them that as well. So we preserve food, we ferment food, and then we cook it. We prepare food and medicine. I teach them. I have to teach my students how to cook. I don't know how many of you guys are teaching your kids how to cook, or if you know how to cook, but a lot of my students come here and even my kids, they have never really cooked before, before a certain age. And so I have to teach them the very basics of learning to cook. And the fact is, wild rice is traditional up here. I don't know how many of you have ever had wild rice, but I gift my students wild rice. I give them a bag of wild rice. And in the 3 years that I've been teaching at this college, I've only had 3 students who knew how to cook wild rice, right? Out of tons and tons of students, I've only had 3 who knew how to cook it. So we can give people in our community members, people who are sick, let's say people who are diabetic, we can give them all the fresh vegetables they want. But do they know how to cook them and eat them, right? That's a real question, because maybe some people do, but many people don't. And we can give them, I've met a lot of people who have no idea. I remember we gave away kohlrabi. I don't know how many of you have tried kohlrabi before. It's delicious, but not a single person we gave it to knew how to cook it. So, how to prepare it. So it's important to teach these kinds of skills. And we don't just teach cooking food. We also teach people how to prepare medicine. So I don't know if you've ever had fire cider or elderberry elixir before. This is fire cider and this is elderberry elixir in the making. These are two medicines that can also be used as food. Fire cider, I can, if any of you who are listening want a recipe, feel free to send me a message on Facebook. I'm Linda Black Elk on Facebook, and I'm happy to send you my fire cider recipe. It's basically apple cider vinegar poured over some very spicy and pungent ingredients like garlic, ginger, hot chilies, horseradish, onions, lemons and lemon peel, turmeric, right? All these spicy things with apple cider vinegar. And you let it sit for a while, and then you take swigs of the vinegar. It's really, really sour and vinegary, but it helps to clear up your lungs. If you have lung congestion, if you're asthmatic like me, it helps to strengthen your lungs. It helps to reduce sinus inflammation and pressure. It helps to lower blood pressure. It lowers blood sugar. And it helps to heal the liver and the kidneys and your whole digestive system. It's amazing, amazing medicine. So if you want that recipe, let me know. Elderberry elixir is like a syrup that's made from elderberries, which are powerfully antiviral. We've been using tons of elderberry elixir all throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, and it is fantastic for helping with even, we have a lot of RSV going around. I don't know if you guys have RSV, you do down there too. So RSV is going around, that's a virus. COVID is still going around, horrible virus. And I know it struck you guys down there super hard, as it did up here as well. But elderberry elixir is a wonderful medicine to treat, get rid of those viral illnesses, boost our immune systems, and help us stay healthy. And if you're diabetic, you can still use elderberry elixir. Okay, I want to make that clear. A lot of people think you can't because it has honey in it, but you can leave the honey out if you need to. Okay. I'm just going to talk about a couple more things, and then so we do more cooking. We make things like bone broth. You can make it from lamb, from mutton. You can make bone broth from the bones of any animal. Okay, and it is healthy and delicious. We put a lot of wild foods. These are some examples of wild foods that we put into our soup. My husband and I call it medicine soup. Okay. Because we put so much medicine into our broths. We put things like nettles, which I know you all have down there. That's the plant. Like if you brush up against it, it causes like an irritation. Some people call them stinging nettles. That's a wonderful anti-inflammatory medicine. If you are suffering from arthritis, if you have neuropathy in your feet or anywhere, if you have inflammation of your lungs, or inflammation of your joints anywhere, nettles are something you can incorporate into your life every day. They are so beautifully medicinal and anti-inflammatory, and they're also absolutely delicious. We put nettles into all of our soups. Okay. Both, this is a soup that we made from buffalo bones, and this is a soup we made as well. Both of them have nettles in them. This down here, I know you guys have this down here. I'm so sorry. I used to know the Danang name for this one, but I can't remember it. In English, we call it bee balm. Some people call it elk medicine. Some people call it wild oregano. And the leaves of it kind of smell like oregano. We put this into all of our soups because it is very, very antimicrobial. So if you know someone with an infection or someone who's prone to infections like pneumonia or like even infected wounds and ulcers, I've worked with a lot of people who get infected diabetic ulcers on their legs. And this is a wonderful medicine for that. We do a lot of mushroom powders from traditional mushrooms as well in our soups. My husband hates mushrooms. Okay, he hates them, and that's a strong word. Hate is a strong word to use, but hate is the accurate word to use in his case. He, I've seen him take like cream of mushroom soup, and take out all the little tiny pieces of mushrooms from cream of mushroom soup. He just can't stand it. And so instead, I dry and powder the mushrooms. See this brown stuff here? That's not chocolate powder, that's mushroom powder. And I take that mushroom powder and I put it into everything we eat. And he doesn't even notice that it's in there. It doesn't have any kind of weird texture. It just adds medicine and nutrition. Okay. Mushrooms are anti-cancer. Mushrooms are antiviral. Mushrooms help to keep our brains healthy. If you know someone who is experiencing dementia or Alzheimer's, or is at risk for that, or even if they just need to improve their memory or have a traumatic brain injury, start incorporating medicinal mushrooms into your lives every day. You can even put them in your coffee, and you won't know they're in there because they don't really have a lot of flavor. Okay. So that's more cooking. These are kale chips. I don't eat potato chips. I eat kale chips. And it took me a little while to make that switch because I love things that are crunchy and salty. And so it took me a while to make that change. But I switched over to kale chips exclusively. I don't eat potato chips anymore. If you need a recipe, let me know. All kinds of salads. This is actually a ratatouille dish that my student made, all from produce she grew herself. This dish over here with the squash and the tomatoes. We also share food and medicine. And if any of you ever wanted to trade, I'm down in the Southwest a lot, but also if you wanted to trade seeds, here in this photo, this is my friend Rosebud. She's Ojibwe from Northern Michigan, and she just happened to be down here, and she brought some of her beautiful Gete Okosaman squash for us. And we gave her a whole bunch of seeds and a whole bunch of squash from down here and things like that. This is my friend Chef Brian Yazzie. He's Dene, but he runs Gatherings Cafe in the Minneapolis American Indian Center in the Twin Cities. And Chef Yazzie, I brought him a whole bunch of buffalo meat and he fed me for the day. So that, believe me when I say his food is so good, that was a good trade. And this is a produce giveaway that we do on campus that we, because we share food with everyone. So that is, just some things that I wanted to share with you all. I'm here if there are any questions, or LaDon, if you had any questions. I just wanted to show you guys a little bit about what we do up there, up here in North Dakota, and how we help to keep our communities healthy.
Wow,
That's amazing.
you got a wealth of information that you're sharing.
Thank you.
Okay. So yeah, so much information we're sharing. Just checking the sound. You're an echo, but we're good.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. It's
A lot that to take in. There's a lot of things I didn't know. I'm not familiar with
all the ingredients and the recipes that you talked about.
So for example, the kohlrabi, the fire cider, and
I'm very interested in figuring out how to dehydrate those mushrooms. So down the road, I think we could have a conversation and sharing recipes. Yeah, and also when you're down here, it would be great to kind of share if we have any anything to kind of work with to increase awareness of some of the foods. I mean, we could learn a lot from some of the recipes that you shared. Yeah.
Yes, I would love that. And that's the thing. There was so much information that I went through just now, just telling you guys about like what we try to do on a daily basis, but we really try to keep it as simple as possible. So my husband and I, in our family, in our home, we can you hear me okay?
I can.
Okay, great. So what we try to do in our home is we eat as much traditional food as possible. or food that we have grown ourselves, food that we have hunted, fish that we have fished, and plants that we have foraged, right? So we do all that stuff. But the thing is, like, we're a family. We have 3 children. You know, a bunch of us are in school. I teach full time. My husband works. You know, we homeschool. So we are very busy, and it seems like it would be impossible for us to have food sovereignty in our lives and be able to like have our own food, you know, and grow our own food and forage. But here's our rule. No matter what, no matter how busy we are, and even sometimes when we're not home and we're traveling, we will devote at least 1 hour a day to food, to our food sovereignty. And so if we're traveling, we will stop and we will do a little bit of foraging, you know, even if it's just for practice, or even if it's just food that we eat that day. If we're home, we try to cut up at least a couple of squash or something to dry. We try to pickle, like, you know, if we have some extra, we will devote, you know, when all of our cucumbers are coming in, we will devote at least 1 hour a day to pickling those cucumbers, or to making kimchi, you know, because we eat a lot of that in our house. We do a lot of like fermentation and things like that. So it's just 1 hour a day. And you know, I had a student say to me, I don't have an hour a day. I'm a student, I'm super busy, and I work. And so I said to her, okay, I just want you to do an assignment, and I want you to be totally honest. And I want you to keep track of every minute that you spend on Facebook tomorrow. And she came back to me and she spent 4 hours on Facebook. She said, I had no idea I spent that much time on Facebook, but it was 4 hours. And I said, I'm only asking you to devote one of those 4 hours to food preservation, and you know, feeding yourself and learning those skills. So it seems like a lot of information, but I'm telling you that if you keep it simple, it's not going to drive you crazy. Everyone can do this, I feel like.
Right. It's really taking on, I would say for me personally, I feel like that's added responsibility, but it's doable. An hour a day is doable. So really incorporating, we talk to the community about, you know, trying new things. For example, walking, incorporating that into your life. That's part of wellness, you know, overall wellness. Maybe it could be anything. It could be meditating. It could be sitting, you know, it could be walking. It could be running. It could be taking care of your mental health, you know. But that's that could be added as wellness, incorporating wellness, being out in the garden, harvesting, dehydrating, canning. There's not a whole lot of personally from my home. My home, we don't do any canning, and I would like to learn. I did some curriculum on canning and dehydrating food products, but I never taught from that aspect. But I know it's a good way of preserving food. Back during the pandemic, I know on our reservation, there are these farmers that were growing food, squash, corn. They had an abundance of ingredients and they couldn't get it out to the community members. And so a lot of that went to waste. They didn't realize how the pandemic was going to set in. So farmers markets were shut down. And so a lot of food went to waste. They tried to save the seeds, but my job was to create a curriculum to give to them, to provide to them. So in the future, they'd be able to preserve those foods that, you know, if anything ever came up, they'd have a backup for preserving those ingredients.
Yep, my 2 older sons are enrolled on the Standing Rock Reservation, and we have a lot of friends down there. And during the pandemic, they were handing out produce boxes, you know, and they couldn't, like, it's like you were saying, they couldn't hand out enough of them. They had such an overabundance of them. But I remember hearing stories about how they would put these produce boxes on the porch, and they would bring a new produce box every week. And so they came back next week, and the old produce box from last week with rotting vegetables in it was still sitting there. And it was so, it was just so hard. But the fact is, the people who were receiving, a lot of the people who were receiving those boxes didn't know how to cook with fresh vegetables. Like, some of them didn't know how, but even those who knew how had plenty, and they didn't know how to preserve the stuff that was in the boxes so that they could use it later. And so, that's a real thing, and something that we all need to talk about. I love canning, but it takes time to learn, and it takes time to learn how to do it safely. I think a lot of people are scared to hurt themselves by canning because they've heard horror stories about botulism. But there are lots of ways to do it safely.
Right. And then also I don't know what can be canned. I know there's a lot of different foods that do well with canning, but then I'm afraid that, I might pick the wrong ingredient and it might turn to mush, or I'm the science behind it is probably like cooking, what ingredients work well and what heat methods to use. But I feel like food preservation is the same way. Like, some ingredients will work well and some won't. But the background, the details behind the medicinal uses is what intrigues me. And how you said, like, for example, dehydrated mushrooms can be put in coffee. I didn't realize. I feel like I have dehydrated mushrooms, but when I rehydrate them, there's such a strong, pungent flavor when I add them to my recipes. So I can't think of how those dehydrated mushrooms could, not stand out in my coffee.
Yep. No, my husband didn't believe it either. And when you rehydrate them whole, they definitely have a texture and even a flavor that is very strong. So if anyone is interested in using dehydrated mushrooms or mushroom powder, they do actually sell a brand. It's a little bit expensive, but if you just wanted to try it, they do sell a brand called Mud Water. MUDWTR. They kind of abbreviate the water part, but Mud Water, they actually sell that. And it's a mushroom powder. I think they put turmeric in there as well. And you can make a coffee substitute out of that. So if you're trying to wean yourself off of caffeine and you're trying to wean yourself off of coffee, that is a great alternative. Yes.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. Okay. Good information. And then the kale chips as well. That's really interesting, intriguing. I'd like to give that a try. I'm a potato chips type of person. I like salty, I like crunchy. But what I'm trying to figure is moderation, teaching in moderation, also trying to find that balance and always remembering, how much is too much, throughout the day. If we're eating preserved foods, there's a lot of sodium in some of those preserved foods, maybe a lot of sugar, a lot of saturated fats, trans fats, that's helping to preserve that. And to try to put that in a conversation to the community is a little bit challenging, explaining, this product is not the product that's good for you, and trying to explain and step back and say, okay, how are they going to take this in if I bring it down to where they can understand. And I like that you're providing, a lot of information around produce and some of the medicinal uses and some of the preservation, the ways to preserve these foods. And I'm sure that we can find the ingredients here within and on our reservations to work with them and learn about them, and then also really identify and see for ourselves that there are beneficial properties that we take from them. I'd like to learn more about that myself.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll have to come back when when you have time, because I actually had a whole presentation also prepared that would have taken way too much time, I realized. And it's just about like all of these, things that grow around us. I know you guys have a lot of milkweed, for example, down there. Milkweed is a beautiful food, and it's also very medicinal and very good for our digestion, but also things that like even squash has medicinal properties, as long as we are treating it with respect when we're cooking it. And that can sometimes be very hard, especially like for me and the whole crunchy, salty snack foods. That was hard for me to give up. So I did have to find, ways around that. I think things, we love things with simple carbs, right? Potato chips, fry bread, potatoes, my students tend to love those kinds of things. Corn, just yellow sweet corn, there are great alternatives to these. Like, one of the things I talk to my students about is no one is trying to food shame you. I understand, like, I have a student who loves canned corn, like a student right now. So I actually made her some nishijiji, your beautiful white steamed corn. I made that for her in broth and gave it to her. And she said, this is so much better than canned corn, and nishijiji and those, steamed, like the Dene steamed corn and the steamed corn, the chicos that a lot of my friends do down in the Southwest, when you're using indigenous corn, it is so much lower glycemic index than canned corn. And so, I think and plus you're getting the exercise from growing it if you're growing your own corn. So, when it comes to potatoes, for example, white fleshed potatoes, like, russet potatoes and the red skinned potatoes that have the white flesh, those are very high glycemic index. But if you just switch over and like you said, in moderation, just a little bit of purple potatoes, sweet potatoes, orange and yellow fleshed potatoes. They're lower glycemic index. And so they're less likely to raise your blood sugar, spike your blood sugar as high. So, I'm not asking my students to completely give up these things they love. I'm just asking them to think about some alternatives to slowly incorporate into their lives. Up here, we came up with a recipe for fry bread using acorn flour, cornmeal, and almond flour. And it's delicious. It's delicious, And so my students were still able to have some fry bread when they wanted it, but it was so much healthier for them.
Right. So, yeah, we've trying different ways, doing different things. I know I didn't change the recipe for fry bread. I think that would have been difficult for me to spring that on a community. So instead we cut it up, and then we cut up the tortilla dough, and it became more art focused. So that was one of the ways, and it was in moderation. So those skinny strips, there was only 2 with the bowl of soup. And so that was one of the, culinary routes that I took one time, and
I love that.
It worked out just fine. But yeah, we question the ingredients, and the only way we'll learn is if we try. What do we have to lose? Trying new things, taking new roads.
Yeah, exactly. I love that.
Right. I don't think we have any questions, but yeah, we would love to have you back. This is our first time kind of putting a podcast together, invited guests. I'm really appreciative that you took the time to create this PowerPoint, this presentation, and share it with the community. And we look forward to hearing from you and working with you. And I do hope that our viewers reach out to you through Facebook to get those recipes. I know I will. I'll be talking to you once again, and hopefully in the near future, we'll be able to put maybe another series together, and definitely have you back for a couple days. And yeah, we do appreciate all the information you provided. I'm glad it was recorded, and it was also showed through our Facebook and YouTube live stream.
Awesome.
So yeah,
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I've had so much fun. It was great to visit with you.
awesome. And I'm just going to take it all in. But once again, I hope the weather isn't too crazy for you there, but for us, we have clear blue skies. It's a beautiful day here in New Mexico. And so, yeah.
Beautiful. Take care. Enjoy that.
Thank you so much. Have a good day.